Hello and welcome to the Seatton Education Podcast, where we delve into all things home education with expert guests from around the world. I'm Victoria. Today I'm speaking to Rachel McGregor, a former primary school teacher with over 15 years' experience. Rachel trained at the University of Cambridge and was a head teacher for 7 years. However, she left the school system to become a dedicated home educator to her own children. She has now founded Wild Walker Academy to help parents take learning outside and into nature. Hi, Rachel. Thanks so much for being with me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I've given you a brief introduction there, but could you just give us a little more of an idea of your educational background and also your career to date?
Absolutely, yes. So, as you said, I studied at the University of Cambridge as a teacher. That's where I completed my PGCE. And I specialised in early years, which is ages 3 to 7. And then about 7 years ago, became a head of school. And the school that I went into, which I moved to, was in a really bad way. And I worked with an amazing team of people, and we managed to turn that school around. It was in special measures when we started. A couple of years later, we were judged to be good. And so I stayed there for another 5 years, had 2 children during that time, and then decided that I would finish my teaching career and be at home with my children and home educate them.
So that's an amazing journey. What made you first want to be a teacher at the other end of that journey? What made you get into it?
Well, I have 2 sisters who are considerably younger than me. They are 8 and 10 years younger than me. And I remember just having this absolute fascination at development, child development, and watching them grow in a way I suppose a parent does, is the way you do as a mother, but getting a preview into that early, and being able to see them learn to walk, learn to talk, learn to read and write, and eventually move through the education system. And I found it so fascinating to see how children just seem so incredibly programmed to learn. And I love that.
And so when you did that and when you went into it, you did well at it. So I assume you enjoyed it. So what made you leave? I mean, you've mentioned you had your own children, but leaving and then deciding to home educate, that's quite a big step for a teacher.
When I look back at my career over the 15 years, I have had 7 different Ofsted inspections.
No, so for non-British people, that is our inspection and sort of school ranking board, and they go into schools and they assess how a school is performing.
Yeah, so they often come into a school for a couple of days, and they monitor teaching and speak to school leaders and make a judgment as to how that school is doing. It's something that is either coming or is happening or has just happened, and you just live by it. So it's a big influence. I remember my first ever Ofsted, which took place when I was in my 3rd year of teaching, so I was very green. And what used to happen then is they actually used to judge the teacher. So you could be judged as outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. And there'd been no concerns over how I was doing as a teacher. So I got the lead inspector, and about half an hour later, my head teacher came to see me and said, "You need to sit down because you've been given a requires improvement." And whilst we don't think that that's not what we're seeing, we're arguing with the inspector about it, but that's how she feels. I was like, okay, obviously a bit surprised because that's not something that I'd had highlighted before. And I met with the inspector after school, and we spoke for an hour, and said, okay, so moving forward, how would you teach the next lesson, or how would you deliver it? And she outlined how she would go about delivering it, and so that's what I did, and I did it to the letter. And then I went from being a requires improvement teacher to an outstanding one. There was nothing particularly awful with the first lesson. There was nothing particularly brilliant about the second. But the thing was that it matched her view. With primary schools, and particularly small primary schools, everything comes down to pupil numbers. Because there's X amount of £1,000 for each pupil that you have walked through the door. It's a huge amount of money. So if you have a bad Ofsted judgment and people either choose to leave or choose not to come, then that has a massive impact on how you can operate your school, because you don't have the budget, you don't have the money. Then that can be very damaging for a school if it's based on an opinion.
Another school might have another team of inspectors who might have completely different opinions.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So whilst the mantra in schools is always, we don't do it for Ofsted, we do it for the children, it is only natural that schools will bear in mind what Ofsted are going to think of what they're doing, because being able to continue as a school and being able to secure your funding and have your children come in it depends completely on that judgment.
I'm really pleased that you're speaking to this, because I think when parents send their children to, particularly to state government funded schools, this is I don't think they realize that they are businesses. There's a pound or a dollar sign on a child's head, and therefore there are these normal economic, bureaucratic requirements that I think maybe parents as end users don't really have any idea about. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think so. And I think that parents probably believe that we have the freedom to do things however we want to do it. I think about this cycle of 4 years, and I wonder if sometimes having that monitoring, if that if that stops people taking risks that might have enhanced our education system.
How do you think that impacts on the children? What do you think the effect on them is?
Well, interestingly, one of the more recent changes that Ofsted introduced was in 2019. There was a real shift away from maths and English data to giving more value to the curriculum as a whole. So another thing they were very clear about is that there should be no hot housing. Now, hot housing is something that happens in schools where they focus on maths and English to make sure they got the best results possible, but the children would miss out on other subjects like geography, history, and things like PE and music, art. And we were all incredibly excited. We all thought, fantastic, they want a bespoke curriculum for our children. And we got it all planned and all sorted. But once those inspections started on that new framework, it soon became very apparent that actually there were two main problems. The first one was that despite the fact that schools were being told not to focus in on maths and English so much, the data had to remain the same. So you had to give more time to the other subjects, but there was to be no drop off in English and maths. And then the second one being the focus on deep dives. The deep dive was a thing where they focus on one particular subject. They go, right, we're going to do a deep dive in geography. We want to see geography across your entire school. We want to see the work that you've been doing. We want to see your curriculum plans and the detail they want to go into. We want to know sequencing. We want to know the concepts you're going to be teaching each year. We want to know the vocabulary they're going to be learning. So if we were writing our own curriculum, the level of detail that we had to go into in order to meet those standards was incredibly, incredibly high. And of course, we're running schools. We're not just curriculum writers, we're running schools. We've got kids who need us, we've got teachers who need us, we've got things that are happening that are just, you can't predict. So what ended up happening was schools started buying curriculums off the shelf. And so then teachers are rolling out curriculums rather than sort of making it their own. And that's how our leaders are protecting against this intense questioning. But what does that mean for the children? I always think if teachers are feeling stressed, then that's going to be coming down to children through trickling down. It just does. And I think also there's less freedom to go off piste. You can't just go, oh, well, you're interested in that. Well, let's go. Let's look this up. Let's get the books out. Let's really dive into that.
You're having to check everything and prepare everything so long in advance to get signed off either by school leadership or by inspectors. Teachers don't dare go off piste. Yeah, I think that is difficult. When you were a teacher, and particularly a head teacher, and you were interacting with parents, how involved did you feel parents were, either by choice or by just the school setup?
It varies. I think it does in every school. Every school I've worked in, it's varied. You get some parents who are very engaged, and then you have parents who are a little bit more kind of step back and sort of see it as the school's responsibility, and they don't like to interfere. You know best. But I think the thing that I would say is in common in both of them is that there seems to be sort of this disempowerment. Even the parents who are engaged, they know they don't have control. That sort of lies with the school and this feeling of, well, I can't really have an impact on that because I'm not doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, from a fair logistical perspective, if you had 30 different sets of parents all saying, well, I think English should be taught this way, or, I mean, obviously that wouldn't work. So you do relinquish that control if your child goes to school, even if you might get lucky and have a really great teacher and a really great head who completely align with your view and your vision. But that is really a bit of luck, it sounds like.
Yeah, and also every child needs something different. So, you've got children who are visual learners, kinesthetic learners. They need different things, and meeting all of those needs, and they might be working at different levels and interested in different stuff. And when you're trying to bring all of those needs together, that there has to be a level of compromise, else it just doesn't work.
And from your experience of being a teacher and now going to home educate your children, do you feel that the ratio between adult and child is it as significant as we might think?
I certainly think that being able to individualize learning
Mm,
is the key. It's about making sure it absolutely suits that child.
mm,
And if it does, then I think you can cut the amount of time down. I don't think that home educators need to be working a 9 till 3 timetable by any means. I
mm,
think you can, because it's just that one to one, and because you're being driven by the individual needs and the individual interests. I really don't think that that amount of time needs to be given to it. So yes, I suppose so. In that sense, you can progress quicker because you can follow the child's instincts and needs and interests, and not worry so much about having to meet the needs of all.
mm. And I suppose another point is that you were a teacher and a very good one at that. I think some people, and actually a lot of, not a lot, but a lot of people who do home educate, I suppose, do have a background in teaching. I wonder whether people will say, "Oh, well, is it only for the children of trained teachers?" What would you say to that?
I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions about home education.
Mm,
I really do. I think that when I think about teacher training, um, I think about how much of that is spent preparing teachers to teach in school.
mm,
You think about classroom organisation, behaviour management of 30 children. Anyone who's held a birthday party for their children knows what that's like. And sort of safeguarding procedures, things like that you have to know inside out. You have to be ready, ready from the moment you start with, and a lot of time goes into that. So when it comes to things like actually teaching, I'd be really interested to see what percentage of teacher training actually goes into that, and
mm,
even more so with subject knowledge. And I think that's one of the messages I really want to try and get across through Wild Walker Academy, is the fact that teachers aren't experts at everything. You can't be. You can't be an expert at everything. And I actually used to quite like it as a head of school. I'd walk into a classroom and say, "Oh, what are you doing?" And say, "Oh, I'm just watching this video on long division just to brush up for tomorrow. This long division with year six tomorrow. I want to make sure I'm getting this right. I want to make sure it's in line with what we've said we're going to teach, and I just want to make sure I've got it."
mm,
And I think, great.
mm,
And I think it's so much more powerful as a parent if you are in that home education atmosphere as a life learner
mm.
than if you are there as an expert. Because you know what it's like when you have someone who's an expert. You feel less willing to sort of take risks and put yourself out there because you don't want them to think badly of you.
Mm,
But if you're learning it together, or they're only a couple of steps ahead, then that
mm.
kind of feels more of a journey for both of you, and it's less intimidating.
I think that anecdote is so important that you've just said, because I do think we all think that teachers have all the answers. And I think also there is a temptation to think that when children go to school, they come out at the end of it knowing everything by the age of 18. And of course, that's not the case. Learning how to learn, I think, is much more important than actually what you're learning. So if you have the skills to guide your child into knowing, firstly, to wanting to access more knowledge, and secondly, knowing how to find out answers to things they don't know.
And we're not born experts on Romans and and rock formation.
Yeah.
We don't know it all. We have to go and we have to brush up. And as curriculums change, you have to learn more. And I think it's important that children know that. And I think that that's one thing that home educators need to remember. If parents are at home with their children, it's okay not to know,
Mm,
and it's okay to get caught out and go, "I actually don't know that. Let's find out together."
mm. And I think there's a lot of research on a slightly periphery point to that I think there is a link here, that there's a lot of research of that children, pre-reading children of parents who themselves read a lot, not read to the children, but the parents read, the children acquire their reading skills much quicker. And I think it's because they're seeing that behavior modeled all the time by parents, even, reading a magazine, reading the newspaper, reading something, reading a novel, reading
Yes.
nonfiction. The child is seeing that all the time, and they understand that that isn't just a top-down, um, you know, top-down sort of baton saying you've got to learn to
Mm.
read because you're the child. They sort of see the value of that's actually a life skill, and therefore they're
Yeah.
seeing that modeled. And I think it's the same a bit with learning. If you're showing, yeah,
Absolutely.
I don't know the answer, let's go and find it. Good question.
Absolutely. Or seeing you learn about something else that you're interested in, and that links to reading, doesn't it? So
Hmm.
you're right. Having parents who are readers is incredibly powerful. They go,
Yes.
"Oh, that's what people do. I want to be a reader,"
Yes.
and they're just, and also being in an environment with books, of course. It's interesting you should mention reading, because one thing that was a bit of a eureka moment for me when it came to home education was when we were talking about, we were looking at SATs results, national SATs results for year six pupils. And it was after COVID. So obviously during COVID, I think it was 2 years they didn't sit SATs because the children were in and out of school, and it didn't seem reasonable to expect them to sit that. So I think it was that third year after people had returned and we were kind of going back to normal. When we sat the SATs, what was really interesting is that the reading score, the percentage of children who scored the expected standard for reading went up.
Wow.
After 2 years at home.
Wow, that is
Powerful, isn't it?
Yes.
It's powerful. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And I thought, now, not so much the writing and the maths, and as we know, maths is something that parents feel less confident with. It's something that in Wild Walker Academy we really focus on, because I do think that maths is the one that people go, oh, I can't do maths. In a way that people would say, oh no, I can't read. They just wouldn't say that. Yeah, they do, but with maths it's far more acceptable. No, I can't do that. I don't do maths. No, maths isn't for me. I was never good at maths. Reading we can do. Reading we feel confident at. And I just thought, how interesting is that when children were at home on and off for 2 years, and parents could read with them and teach them to read, and the scores went up.
That's amazing.
You would expect them to fall through the floor, and they didn't.
That's really, really insightful, isn't it? That sheds a lot of light. Now, you've touched on it, but I'm so keen to hear more about Wild Walker Academy. It's focusing on nature. Why is that important to you? And why do you think it's important for children?
Well, my first sort of experience with nature and learning came when I first started at the school where I was head of school. And we had some children in that school who had completely disengaged from education. They didn't see themselves as learners. And we knew that we had to give them an opportunity to be successful. But we knew in order to get to that point, we'd have to put it into a new context. So we implemented an outdoor curriculum where they went outside for an afternoon a week, and all of the learning activities were outdoor based. Woodwork, making shelters, campfire, things like that. And the children were able to take some risks and engage with some new learning that they hadn't experienced before. And what I found fascinating was that children who had been refusers in the classroom, children who were completely disengaged with learning, not only became learners, they became leaders. So not only did they really sign up to the skills that we were teaching them, they would then take them and teach them to the younger children.
Wow.
And I saw the power, and that's when I first realized, my goodness, this is really powerful. Actually, these children, this is totally turning it around for them. And so that's something that we really kept going with because we felt it was really important. I then started to look into it a little bit more, started to read up on it, and I started to realize the benefits that children can gain from being outside, the physical benefits, the improvements in strength, coordination, and the sort of the emotional benefits, the ability to emotionally regulate, to focus. It can improve focus. A book that was very transformative for me was Balanced and Barefoot by Angela J. Hansen. Really outlines the benefits of taking children outside. So I'd really recommend that if that's something you're interested in. And it was just the reduction in the symptoms of anxiety and depression and stress. And I thought, this is incredible. And then I started thinking in the context of home education, because to put that in, to take schooling in the education system outside it entirely would be probably a bit of a stretch, like I said before about Mavericks. For home education, that's perfectly feasible, and I do really believe that education can be taken outside almost entirely. In fact, maybe entirely. Something that I'm looking forward to testing and pushing.
Wow, that's so interesting. And what are your plans for Wild Walker? How do you intend to help other people sort of follow suit?
So Wild Walker Academy is designed to support parents in taking children outside for home education. And I believe that confidence is at the heart of it. It's about leaving the textbooks behind, stepping away from the worksheets if we can, and upping parent subject knowledge and confidence enough so they feel, right, I can take this learning outside. I don't need anything to kind of hinge it on at the table. We can go out and try it, particularly things like maths. I think maths will be very powerful outside. So we are developing 6 courses that parents can take to support them with that subject knowledge, and then lesson plans that are all designed for outside. And not in, I know Wild Walker Academy on Instagram is set in a woodland. There's a lot of being in a very nice woodland. That's not what it has to look like. It could be in the garden, it could be the local park, and those sessions are very much designed with that in mind.
Wow, that's a really exciting goal. I suppose, given your unique perspective, I would love to ask you what you think the biggest misconceptions are about home education. You've sat on both sides of the fence, and yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think we've touched on this a little bit already, but I really think that on both sides, both camps believe that you have to be an expert to home
Mm,
educate. The teachers believe that in schools. I think that parents believe it too.
mm.
And I'm very much of the opinion that that is not the case.
Yeah.
I'm very much of the opinion, like we've discussed, that parents can upskill themselves
Mm,
sufficiently to be able to teach their children. Learning happens naturally.
mm.
We're programmed to learn. Human nature is to learn and to be curious. And it's about fostering that and just making sure we don't kill it off.
Yes.
Just keeping that going.
And I suppose the flip side of that is what is the biggest misconception, do you think, about school, conventional school?
I think it's that parents feeling that head teachers and teachers have the final say.
Mm,
Sometimes there are things, when I think about things that aggravate parents the most, attendance is an absolute classic
mm,
example. So a parent has taken their child or their children on a 2-week family holiday during term time because that's the only time they can afford to do it, because of the ridiculous pricing. And the schools come down hard, and you get the letter and you get the meeting and maybe you get the fine. And they sit opposite the head teacher or whoever is in charge of the attendance in that school, thinking that this is personal and you've chosen to do this to me, and that's just not the case.
mm,
Attendance is one of those measures which is looked at very, very closely by Ofsted.
mm.
So schools will always hold it very, very highly in their regard. They will always follow through on it. But necessarily, does the head teacher opposite you feel that you shouldn't have gone on holiday?
Mm.
You might say.
Yes, quite. And I would love to ask you a question that I really enjoy asking my female guests in particular, which is, you obviously had a career and a successful career at that. You're now opting to be at home and focus on your family and your children in a society where, let's face it, that is not really the most highly regarded thing to do. So how do you round that square yourself, in forming your identity, I suppose?
I think I've been quite lucky in that the people around me have been really supportive and accepting of the decision, which is great. But I completely get what you're saying, and I think that this is an unfashionable view, but I really do believe that for me personally, being a teacher was the thing that I was meant to do before I became a mother.
Interesting.
I really do. I really do.
Well, that is yeah, that's really, really great to hear. And I suppose lastly, is the plan to homeschool your children forever?
Yes. We'll always put the children first, though. If for any reason it absolutely wasn't working and they were utterly miserable, we would never make them carry on like that. But I think there's so many ways in which you can home educate that that doesn't mean that you would have to move away from it. And to be honest, it is secondary school that I have the most reservations about when it comes to the education system. There is a secondary school not too far away from where I live, where I know from first-hand experience with a friend whose child has been there, that they're not allowed to take their blazer off in the summer until the bell sounds, to show that the temperature is high enough for them to be able to take off their blazers. And that's just not a level of control I'm willing to accept. And I wouldn't want my children to accept that either. And I'm very much of the opinion that if you send your children to school, you sign up to the policies that they have got in place. If that is their policy, then that is their policy, and that is their right to enforce that. But that's not a choice for me.
Rachel McGregor, thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been great.
And thank you so much for joining the Seatton Education Podcast. Whether you watched us on YouTube or you listened as a podcast, please subscribe, like, and comment as we discuss how home education can be an achievable alternative to conventional schooling. See you next time.